How is it going, man? How's it going? Hopefully, everyone that watches this is having a great day here. But I got some bad news for you. Congress, the current Congress, the previous Congress, has failed you with their policies. And since Biden is president, he gets all the blame and all the credit. And Bidenomics at play, you'll need at least another 11K just for the same standard of living. And what do I mean by that? I got two stories. I'm only going to read one of them. I'm just going to highlight the other one. According to ground.news, there is no center, so it doesn't matter which one I read. See here, that one's not available, unfortunately. Americans need an extra $11,000, or actually $11,400 today just to afford the basics. That is what our current economic situation is. The typical American household needs to spend an additional $11,434 annually to maintain the same standard of living as in January 2021. Food, transportation, housing, and energy are the main categories requiring heavier spending, accounting for nearly 80% of the additional expenses. Inflation is the major concern for Americans despite wage gains as price has increased more than hourly pay. Let's see here. Blah, blah. President Biden is facing criticism for his economic policies with low approval ratings. Republican lawmakers are blaming Bidenomics for the financial strain on families. Low and middle income Americans are struggling financially, with average income falling short by almost $14,000 in 2022, requiring some to take a second or third job. Now, there's CBS, which Ground News says that they are highly factual and leans left. I'm going to read that one. See here, typical American household must spend an additional $11,000 annually just to maintain the same standard of living that they enjoyed in January 2021, right before inflation soared to a 40-year high. According to recent analysts of government data, such figures underscore the financial squeeze many families continues to face. Even at the rate of U.S. inflation recedes, the economy by many measures remains strong, with jobless rates at a two-decade low. Analysts from Republican members of the U.S. Senate Joint Economic Committee taps government data such as Consumer Price Index and Consumer Expenditure Survey to examine the impact of inflation state by state. Now, keep in mind, even if they get inflation down to 2%, the damage is already done. We would actually have to go through 2% deflation for the next 6 years in order to get back to January 2021, probably even more. Like when I say deflation, I mean controlled deflation. I'm not talking out of control deflation. Because I would like to see a deflation, but I know that the powers to be will not make that happen, unfortunately. Such figures underscore financial. I already read that one. Even as many Americans say that they aren't feeling those gains, this is far more people reported struggling financially than they did prior to the pandemic. According to the CBS News polling, inflation is the main reason Americans express pessimism about the economy, despite bright points, which also includes stronger wage gains in recent years. See, this is the left-wing media trying to sugarcoat the bad news is that we Americans, especially the lower class and lower middle class, have been robbed about anywhere between $10,000 to $14,000 in the last couple of years per year. They're trying to sugarcoat the gains, but the thing is, as inflation jumps and you only get a 2 to 3% raise each year, you're still not covering the inflation. Biden administration called this analyst flawed, citing federal labor data. A White House spokesman noted that per capita disposable income has risen 16% since December 2020, just prior to the President Joe Biden's inauguration. 14 million more Americans have jobs today than when President Biden took office, and the household disposable income is up by almost 21,000 since December 2020. Unless you're actually saving money and finding ways to cut costs, I don't see this happening unless they're only pulling people that make upwards to 100K to 250K or even up to 300K per year. They may have a disposable income that raised, but the average Joe makes anywhere between 30 to 50,000 a year. Let's see here. And what Congress Republicans are pushing, one-sided study that won't admit that proposals would raise the cost of middle class and cut Social Security and Medicare so they can give rich special interests more tax giveaways. Actually, yeah, boom. The Democrats always say this, but here's the thing. Unless changes are made to Social Security or Medicare, if they want to keep this going, now I know that they've been saying that Social Security is going to dry up in 10 years, regardless of which year that they mention. Sometimes making cuts to Social Security and Medicare is a way to straighten it so it's not draining the funds as quickly as they can. The other thing that people don't talk about is the foreign aid that we gave Ukraine alone should be going to Social Security or Medicare, or cutting down the debt and actually pushing the inflation down. But no one wants to talk about that when they're talking about economics. To be sure, economics point out to a number of pandemic-related issues that cause high inflation rather than decisions from one political party. For instance, spending bills that were signed by both President Donald Trump and Joe Biden that put stimulus money into the hands of millions of Americans while global supply chain snarls and the labor shortage drove up the cost of goods and service. So this is why I'm calling out Congress at the beginning of the video, because they are the ones that pass the bills that goes on to any president's desk. They are more to be blamed, but however, I understand the president is the CEO of the country. He is the top representative of the country, and they get the blame and the credit. Even as inflation is now cooling rapidly, many consumers say that they aren't feeling it, with a new bank rate survey finding 60% of working Americans say their income has lagged inflation over the past 12 months. On edge, the average hourly pay for workers has increased a robust 13.6% since January 2021, although it lags the 17% increase in inflation during the same period, according to government data. This is what I'm talking about. You may get a couple points of increase, percentage of increase, but it's not keeping up with inflation. So even if you're getting paid more, things cost even more to purchase. Let's say a loaf of bread used to cost you $1. Now it costs you $3. Although I don't think bread is a good example. But either way, you get the example. Let's see here. The main categories required heavier spending for consumers simply to tread water, food, transportation, housing, and energy, which together accounts for almost 80 cents of every $1 in additional spending, according to the Republican analysts. The other thing you got to keep in mind, another thing that's that's driving inflation is the war on fossil fuel. There was the XL or the Keystone XL extension pipeline that Joe Biden just axed. Now, I know there's some debates whether or not that fuel will be used here in the United States or abroad. But the thing is, even if it's abroad, that's going to flood the global markets with fuel, which means that you have a higher supply, which then means that the demand is less for it, which means prices go down. But since he killed that and signaled a war on fossil fuels, those prices have risen because their futures are uncertain. So therefore, if it costs more to transport goods and services, then those prices are going to go up as well. I don't know if this story talks about it. Let's see here. Middle and low income Americans aren't doing that well enough. They're living fragilely on the edge, says Gene Ludwig, chairman of the Ludwig Institution of Shared Economics and Prosperity, LISEP. I think those who own analysts found that the income needed to cover the basics fell short for almost $14,000 on average in 2022. Where the inflation bites hits the hardest, you got the blue and the red. Texas is pretty purple. You got California and all these right here. Right here, you got some of the city where the standard of living wasn't all that high to begin with. But yeah, it's anytime that there's inflation, it's going to hurt the people that are already struggling, the people that are already living paycheck to paycheck. Those are the ones that inflation hurts the most. Around the U.S., the states with the highest additional expenditure to afford the same standard of living compared to with 2021 is Colorado, where households must spend additional or extra $15,000 per year, says the JEC analyst found. Residents in Arkansas, meanwhile, had to spend at least to maintain their standard of living at about $8,500 on an annual basis. Now, keep in mind that this is the average. Some people didn't have to spend this much. Others had to spend even more. This is just the average. So mileage may vary. But still, this is a terrible thing to be reading, because let's say you're living paycheck to paycheck in 2021 or even 2019. And you're barely making due. The pandemic happened and inflation happened. Now you're no longer making due. You may get a raise, which may help offset it, but per their reports, $8,000 is a lot of money. That is a lot of money to someone who's barely making ends meet. Let's see, your difference costs are tied to local economy differences. For instance, the typical housing in Colorado requires an additional $267 per month compared to January 2021, while other states saw much smaller increases, the analysts found. Now, I can only speak to Austin, Texas. Luckily, I own my house. I'm not a renter, but rent for your basic crappy apartment room is anywhere between $2,000 to maybe $2,700, which is a lot of money per month. That's just going to rent. And that's like the cheapest you're going to be able to find. You may be able to find it in the 1,000s, depending on location. Still, a higher cost of living doesn't necessarily doom people financial distress. Ludwig's group recently found that some expensive cities that offer the best quality life for working class Americans, largely because the higher income that the workers can earn in these cities. Inflation takes a bigger bite out of lower income households because the necessities that they spend on bigger share of their income on basics other than higher income Americans. And until recently, the lower middle class income workers' wages weren't keeping pace with gains and enjoyed by the nation's top earners. Like I said, the average worker is between, I say, either 35 all the way up to $50,000 a year. So your food costs and basic costs are up more than other costs. Putting on Thanksgiving dinner costs you the same if you're lower or upper income Americans, but for lower income Americans, it's a bigger portion of your spending. It's true, you have less money to spend and you want to have that Thanksgiving dinner and everything costs more. If you only have $10 and it costs $9, that's going to be 90% of your disposable income. Opposed to if you have $100 and it costs you $9, it's a different portion. It's the wealthier, the more higher end middle class are able to absorb the cost to do that. So yes, the low class or the poor and the lower middle class suffer the most. To be sure, inflation is cooling rapidly with October prices rising 3.2% on an annual basis, far lower than the 9.1 pace record in June in 2022. Now, this is 3.2% on a 9.1% pace. So the inflation's already risen up to 9.1%, and the 3.2 is additional 3.2%. So it's not going down. This is why I'm asking for deflation. But pockets on inflation are still hitting consumers, such as fast food restaurants like McDonald's, where Big Macs now cost 10% more than in December 2020. Although inflation is cooling, many consumers may not be feeling much relief because most of the prices are not declining, aka deflating. One major exception is gas, which are notoriously volatile, which has declined about 5% in the past year. Consumers are still paying more, albeit at a slower pace, on top of higher prices that were locked in when price hikes surged in 2022 and earlier this year. Now, and the issue I have is inflation will go down. It won't deflate. Just the rate that is increasing will go down. So unless we actually have a deflation of our currency, those prices are still going to stay high. They're never coming down, unfortunately. And the other story I just want to highlight is more than 765,000 older Texans are struggling to cover housing costs. Reported nearly 1.1 million older Texans are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. The number of Texas households headed by people 65 or older spending 30% or more of their income on housing costs in 2021, nearly doubled from 2017. Losing the home can create a cascade of problems for people in strong need of a support system. Now, this came out today, about 3 hours ago or 11 hours ago. This is an older study that was started in 2017 up to 2021. So even then, they were struggling, even under Donald Trump. And with Austin's local economy, with the housing market the way it is, people buying up homes over the price, well over the price that the homes are worth, inflated the price, which also caused a housing shortage and a rental shortage, meaning that supply and demand rules kick in, people are charging more. I won't go into this one because it's the Texas Tribune, and I already read this. This is just a summary. This is, even though this ended in 2021, the effects are still being felt even in 2023 and 2024. unless the federal government gets their act together, unless the city of Austin gets their act together, it's just going to cascade the issue. And I don't think Bidenomics, I mean, there could be some good things with Bidenomics. Don't get me wrong. It's a terrible bill. There's probably small gems in there that actually benefit some people. But overall, Congress is failing you. Now, we're going to have an election cycle coming up. The House is up for a re-election. I think a third of Congress is up for re-election. And it's time to really look at the people that we're electing. Doesn't matter what party you're at. If they've been in power more than 2 terms for the Senate and more than 4 terms in the House, maybe it's time for some fresh blood. Maybe get rid of the incumbent. If there's an I next to their name, maybe vote for the other party. Or if it's primary, vote for the other person. That's all I'm asking, because we definitely need to clean house in Congress, because they're the one that's create the bills for the presidents to sign. With that being said, that is my video for today, and have yourself a wonderful day, morning, or evening.